Part 1. The Desperate Alliance. The emergency lights cast an ominous red glow across the Galactic Council chambers. For the first time in 3,000 years, every seat was filled. Representatives from 47 different species sat in tense silence, their various forms of breathing creating a symphony of anxiety that echoed through the vast dome-shaped hall. Ambassador Lyria of the Etherian Collective floated at the center podium, her translucent blue form shimmering with barely contained distress. Her people had mastered energy manipulation for millennia, bending light and matter to their will. Yet even they had fallen before the unstoppable advance of the Zephyrian Empire. Friends and allies, Lyria's voice carried the weight of desperation. Across the chamber, we have lost 17 star systems in the past month alone. The Zephyrian war machines have proven immune to every weapon in our combined arsenals. Commander Thorak of the Kalari Republic shifted his massive reptilian frame, scales reflecting the emergency lights like polished armor. His people were warriors born, bred for combat across a dozen different worlds. Their plasma weaponry could melt through asteroid-sized obstacles. Their battle strategies had been refined over centuries of conflict. None of it mattered against the Zephyrians. Our quantum disruptors bounce off their hulls like pebbles, Thorak growled, his voice carrying the frustration of a predator denied its prey. Their adaptive shielding learns from every attack. Each engagement only makes them stronger. Thai. Assembled representatives murmured agreement, a sound like wind through a graveyard. The crystalline hegemony had deployed their matter phase cannons, weapons that could shift solid metal into gas in microseconds. The Zephyrian ships absorbed the energy and grew larger. The Voidwalkers had tried their dimensional rift bombs, capable of tearing holes in space itself. The enemy vessels simply sealed the rifts and continued their advance. What of the Nexus Protocol? Asked a delegate whose voice seemed to come from 3 different directions at once. Surely our combined technological might can devise a solution. Lyria's form dimmed with sorrow. The Nexus Protocol has been activated. Our greatest minds have worked together for 60 cycles. Every simulation ends the same way. Total annihilation within 4 months. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems keeping dozens of different atmospheric requirements stable. Species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war found themselves as helpless as prey animals before a cosmic predator. That's when the human ship appeared on their sensors. The vessel materialized from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Where the other ships in the defensive fleet were elegant curves of advanced metallurgy and energy manipulation, this newcomer looked like it had been assembled from spare parts in someone's garage. The hull showed impact scars from projectile weapons, something most species hadn't used in thousands of years. Primitive chemical burn marks suggested the use of explosive charges for basic demolition work. Most shocking of all, actual welding lines were visible where metal plates had been joined using techniques that predated faster-than-light travel. Incoming communication from the human vessel, announced the chamber's AI system. They're requesting permission to address the council. Thorak's laugh was like grinding stone. Humans, the species that still uses chemical propulsion for atmospheric flight, the ones who solve disputes by hitting each other with metal sticks. They're not even a full member species, pointed out another delegate. Their technology level barely qualifies them for observer status. But Lyria had spent decades studying the galaxy's younger races, and something in the human request made her pause. There was no pleading, no desperate begging for protection that characterized most primitive species facing extinction. Just a simple, professional request to participate in a military discussion. Grant them access, she decided. The main display activated, showing the interior of what could generously be called a bridge. 5 humans sat at workstations that looked like they'd been assembled from a dozen different technological eras. No elegant control interfaces or thought-responsive command systems. Just physical switches, manual controls, and display screens that actually required someone to look at them. The human in the captain's chair was a woman of medium height with graying, hair pulled back in a practical knot. Her uniform was simple, functional, and bore the kind of wear patterns that came from actual use rather than ceremonial display. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds before. Captain Sarah, Chen, Earth Defense Force. We've been monitoring your situation from the outer colonies. Captain Chen, Lyria responded with diplomatic courtesy. While we appreciate your concern, this conflict involves technologies and tactics far beyond. With respect, Ambassador, Chen interrupted quietly. We've been reading your tactical reports. Your problem isn't complicated. You're fighting the same war everyone always fights, just with bigger numbers and fancier weapons. The chamber erupted in outraged voices from dozens of species. Thorax's roar cut through the noise like a plasma cannon through paper. You dare suggest that the combined military wisdom of 47 civilizations is inadequate? Your species still settles territorial disputes with projectile weapons. Chen's expression didn't change. That's right, we do. Something in her tone made the chamber go quiet again. We've studied your enemy, she continued. The Zephyrian Empire uses adaptive technology. They learn from energy attacks, quantum manipulation, and sophisticated electronic warfare. Every time you hit them with something complex, they get better at stopping it. One of the other humans leaned forward. A weathered man whose hands showed the kind of scars that came from working with dangerous equipment. Sergeant Marcus Reed, Demolitions. Been reading about these adaptive hulls of theirs. Real impressive. Technology. Probably took centuries to develop. Your point, Sergeant? Lyria asked. Reed's smile was sharp as broken glass. All that fancy adaptation programming has to run on something. Computers, processors, power systems. And computers break real easy when you hit them with a hammer hard enough. Preposterous, scoffed a delegate, whose crystalline form resonated with harmonics of disbelief. Their hulls have withstood direct hits from stellar-class fusion bombs. What could primitive kinetic weapons possibly accomplish? The third human, a compact woman with intelligent eyes, looked up from a datapad filled with technical specifications. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Engineering. Question for you. When your ships take damage, how do you repair them? Automated systems, Thorak replied automatically. Nanofabricators, molecular assemblers, energy matter conversion matrices. Right. What happens if those systems get damaged? Secondary systems activate. Redundant backups ensure. What if those break too? Thorak paused, his reptilian features showing confusion. That's theoretical. The probability of cascading system failures across multiple redundant networks is about 100%. If someone walks through your ship hitting things with a crowbar, Dr. Vasquez finished. You've all built these amazingly complex systems that can handle anything except the simplest possible attack. Chen stood from her captain's chair, and somehow the movement commanded attention from beings who could manipulate matter at the subatomic level. We've been fighting wars for 10,000 years, she said simply. Started with rocks and sticks, worked our way up to rockets and rifles. Every time we invented something new, someone else figured out how to break it. So we learned to break things better. She gestured to her crew, and each of them looked like they'd learned to break things very well indeed. Your enemy adapts to sophisticated attacks because sophisticated attacks follow predictable patterns. Energy weapons work on known principles. Quantum effects can be calculated and countered. Even your best strategies are based on logical, tactical doctrine. And human strategies are not? Lyria asked, genuinely curious now. Reed laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Ma'am, the last war I fought, we won a siege by sneaking into the enemy base through their sewage system and setting off homemade explosives in their ammunition depot. The time before that, we ended a 3-month standoff by ramming our ship into theirs and fighting room to room with whatever we could pick up. The assembled delegates stared in horrified fascination. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. This was barely controlled chaos. You see, Chen continued, we never really got civilized enough to fight wars properly. We just got good at solving problems with whatever tools we had available. Usually involves breaking something important until the other side decides to negotiate. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a holographic display showing the Zephyrian ship designs. Look at these things. Magnificent engineering, Adaptive armor, self-repairing systems, quantum processing cores, probably cost more than most planetary economies. Also notice something else, Reed added, pointing to structural details. All those fancy systems? They're integrated, dependent on each other. Take out the right support strut and the whole network cascades into failure. You're talking about boarding actions, Thorax said slowly. Direct assault on enemy vessels. That's been obsolete for millennia. Modern defenses make such tactics impossible. Only if you're trying to be clever about it, Chen replied. We don't do clever, we do effective. The human ship's status appeared on the chamber's displays. 500 personnel, all human. Their equipment manifest read like a museum of ancient warfare. Kinetic rifles, chemical explosives, breaching charges, and cutting torches. Nothing that required more than basic chemistry and physics to function. The Zephyrian Empire has conquered 17 star systems using the most advanced technology the galaxy has ever seen, Lyria observed. You're proposing to stop them with equipment your ancestors might recognize. That's the idea, Chen confirmed. They've spent so much time learning to counter your sophisticated attacks, they've forgotten how to deal with simple ones. She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, species that had mastered technologies beyond human understanding, who traveled between stars as casually as humans walked between rooms, who could manipulate the basic forces of reality itself, all of them helpless before an enemy that had learned to counter everything except the most primitive possible attack. Here's what we're going to do, Chen said with the calm certainty of someone who had made similar decisions before. We're going to get close enough to their ships to touch them. We're going to cut our way inside, and then we're going to break things until they stop working. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then Thorak, veteran of 100 battles, and survivor of campaigns that had reshaped star systems, asked the question that everyone was thinking. And if your primitive tactics fail? If your simple weapons prove as ineffective as our advanced ones? Chen's smile was cold as vacuum. Then we'll try something simpler. The turning point, the Zephyrian fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal and malice. 200 vessels of impossible design filled the void around Kepler Station, the last major stronghold before the galaxy's core worlds. Each ship was a masterpiece of adaptive warfare, their hulls rippling with defensive systems that had already learned to counter every weapon the Allied forces possessed. Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of the flagship Dominion, his towering form encased in biomechanical armor that pulsed with organic circuits. The Zephyrians had evolved beyond pure biology or pure technology, becoming something that merged the advantages of both. Their ships grew rather than being built, learning and adapting with each battle. Deploy the harvester swarms, Vextar commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's living corridors. Begin integration protocols for the new vessels we'll claim today. Around Kepler Station, the Allied fleet prepared for what everyone knew would be their final stand. Kellery dreadnoughts powered their plasma arrays, knowing the weapons would prove useless. Etherian lightships charged their energy manipulators, understanding the futility even as they prepared to die fighting. The crystalline hegemony's geometric vessels arranged themselves in perfect mathematical formations that would accomplish nothing against an enemy that learned from every attack. In his command center aboard the Kellery flagship Vengeance, Commander Thorak watched the approaching doom with the resignation of a warrior who had finally met an unbeatable foe. His species had never surrendered in 3,000 years of recorded history. Today might mark the first time. Zephyrian fleet will be in weapons range in 30 minutes, reported his tactical officer, a young Kalari whose scales had not yet earned the battle scars that marked veteran warriors. Shall I order the fleet to assume attack formation? Thorak's laugh was bitter as plasma fire. Attack formation, defense formation, retreat formation, none of it matters against an enemy that grows stronger with every shot we fire. That's when... Captain Chen's voice cut through the fleet communications with the calm authority of someone who had faced impossible odds before, and lived to tell about it. All Allied vessels, this is Captain Chen. Human forces are beginning their approach. Recommend you maintain distance and observe. On the main display, the human ships were accelerating toward the Zephyrian fleet with what could only be described as suicidal intent. 5 vessels that looked like they'd been assembled in a scrapyard, carrying technology that most species had abandoned millennia ago. "They're flying directly into the enemy formation," gasped the tactical officer. "That's not a strategy, that's mass suicide." But Thorak found himself leaning forward, studying the human approach with professional interest. There was something about their movement patterns, something that reminded him of the hunting techniques his ancestors had used in the deep caves of Keller Prime. The Zephyrian fleet detected the approaching humans and immediately began adaptive countermeasures. Their hulls shifted composition to resist energy weapons. Their defensive grids powered up to deflect quantum attacks. Organic processing centers calculated trajectories and prepared interception courses. They were completely unprepared for what the humans actually did. Instead of weapons fire or energy attacks, the human ships launched hundreds of small objects that barely registered on sensors. Simple metal cylinders with basic chemical propulsion systems, each one containing nothing more sophisticated than high-grade explosives and magnetic clamping devices. "Boarding pods," Thorak breathed, his warrior instincts recognizing the tactic even though he'd never seen it employed on such a scale. "They're not trying to destroy the enemy fleet, they're trying to capture it." The Zephyrian point defense systems engaged, targeting the incoming pods with precision energy beams. Each shot vaporized a boarding pod instantly, and the adaptive hulls began analyzing the simple kinetic projectiles to develop better countermeasures. But there were too many pods and they were too simple to effectively counter. For every 10 that were destroyed, 3 made contact with Zephyrian hulls. Magnetic clamps engaged with metallic clicks that echoed through both vessels, and cutting torches began burning through armor plating that had never been designed to resist such direct primitive assault. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Commander Vextar watched the tactical display with growing confusion. "What are they doing? These projectiles contain no energy signatures, no quantum matrices, they're just metal containers." His tactical officer's biomechanical form twitched with algorithmic uncertainty. "Commander, they appear to be attempting to physically breach our hulls. This is not warfare as we understand it. Impossible. No civilized species has used boarding tactics for thousands of years. The risks are too great, the success probability too low." The first hull breach occurred on a Zephyrian destroyer, as Sergeant Reed's cutting torch finally burned through 3 meters of adaptive armor plating. The opening was barely large enough for a single person, but Reed squeezed through like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The interior of the Zephyrian ship was a marvel of biomechanical engineering. Organic corridors pulsed with data streams. Living computers processed information at quantum speeds. Adaptive systems monitored every function, ready to counter any conceivable threat. Reed looked around at the technological marvel surrounding him, pulled a hand grenade from his belt and threw it at the nearest cluster of important-looking equipment. The explosion was simple chemistry, nothing more sophisticated than controlled combustion, creating pressure waves and shrapnel. The Zephyrian systems had no protocols for dealing with such a primitive attack. Organic computers died, data streams were severed, adaptive networks crashed as critical nodes were physically destroyed by flying metal fragments. "Breach successful," Reed reported over his comm system, his voice calm as ice water. "Moving to secondary objectives. Recommend additional teams focus on the pulsing things. They seem important." Across the Zephyrian fleet, similar scenes played out as human boarding teams cut their way into ships that had been designed to withstand the most sophisticated attacks imaginable. The enemy's adaptive technology was useless against humans who walked up to critical systems and hit them with hammers. Dr. Vasquez found herself in what appeared to be the main processing center of a Zephyrian cruiser. Organic computers the size of buildings processed vast amounts of tactical data, coordinating the adaptive responses that had made the enemy fleet invincible. She studied the magnificent biomechanical architecture for exactly 3 seconds, then began placing explosive charges at structural support points with the methodical precision of someone who understood that complex systems had simple failure modes. The explosions brought down processing nodes that had taken decades to grow. Adaptive algorithms died as their hardware was reduced to biological soup. The cruiser's ability to learn and counterattacks died with them. Engineering section secured, Dr. Vasquez reported. Their learning protocols are offline. This ship is now as vulnerable as any other. Captain Chen's boarding team reached the bridge of the Zephyrian flagship, moving through corridors filled with technology that could reshape matter at the atomic level. The human captain carried a simple kinetic rifle and wore armor that would have been recognizable to soldiers from centuries past. Commander Vextar faced her across his biomechanical command center, his towering form still confident despite the chaos erupting throughout his fleet. "You cannot win," he declared, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies designed to induce fear in organic nervous systems. "We have conquered 17 star systems. Our technology is beyond your comprehension. Your primitive weapons cannot." Chen's rifle shot took out the primary command console with a bullet that cost approximately 2 cents to manufacture. The sophisticated biomechanical systems died instantly, their quantum processors unable to cope with simple kinetic damage. "Here's the thing about primitive weapons," Chen said, advancing toward the secondary command stations with her rifle, ready. "They're really good at breaking things." Another shot destroyed the communications array. A third eliminated the navigation computer. Each bullet represented technology that her species had perfected over millennia of solving problems through direct application of force. "Your adaptive systems are impressive," Chen continued conversationally as she systematically destroyed every piece of important-looking equipment. "But they're designed to counter sophisticated attacks, energy weapons, quantum effects, complex strategies." Vextar stumbled backward as his command systems died around him. "This is not warfare, this is barbarism." "This is problem-solving," Chen corrected. "We identify what needs to stop working, and we make it stop working. Usually involves breaking something until the other side decides to negotiate." The tactical display showed the results of human boarding actions across the Zephyrian fleet. Ship after ship went dark as their adaptive systems were physically destroyed by humans with explosives and crowbars. The invincible fleet that had conquered 17 star systems was being systematically disabled by soldiers using equipment their ancestors would have recognized. Commander Thorak watched from his flagship as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. The Zephyrian Empire, masters of adaptive warfare and technological supremacy, were being defeated by humans with hand tools and chemical explosives. "How?" his tactical officer whispered. "How are they accomplishing this?" Thorak's laughter was like grinding stone, but now it carried admiration instead of despair. "They're not trying to outsmart the enemy. They're not attempting to counter their adaptations or match their sophistication." On the display, another Zephyrian vessel went silent as human boarding teams reached its critical systems. "They're just walking up to the most important thing they can find and hitting it until it breaks," Thorak continued. "The enemy spent so much time learning to counter advanced warfare, they forgot how to deal with simple violence. The battle, if it could be called that, was over within 2 hours. The Zephyrian fleet floated dead in space, their adaptive hulls intact but their internal systems destroyed by humans who understood that the most sophisticated computer in the galaxy still stopped working when you put a grenade next to it. "Captain," Chen stood on the bridge of the captured flagship, surrounded by the wreckage of biomechanical systems that had cost more than most planetary economies. Her rifle was slung across her shoulder, and her uniform showed the kind of wear that came from crawling through enemy ships and breaking things. "Zephyrian fleet neutralized," she reported to the Allied forces. "Enemy vessels are intact but non-functional. Recommend boarding teams from all Allied species to secure the ships and begin integration into our defensive fleet." Ambassador Lyria's voice carried wonder and gratitude across the communications channel. "Captain Chen, how can we ever repay you for this victory?" Chen's smile was visible even through the static of combat communications. "Just remember that sometimes the best solution to a complicated problem is a simple one. And if that doesn't work, try something simpler." Sergeant Reed's voice cut through the channel from somewhere deep in the enemy flagship. "Captain, found their central computer core. Looks expensive. Want me to not break it?" "Negative, Sergeant. Break it thoroughly. We'll build our own." The sound of explosions echoed through the captured vessel as humanity once again solved a galactic crisis through the time-honored tradition of breaking things until they stopped being a problem. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy learned to see humanity differently, not as primitive beings clinging to outdated methods, but as problem solvers who understood that sometimes the most elegant solution was the simplest one. The Zephyrian Empire's remaining forces, upon learning that their invincible adaptive technology had been defeated by humans with crowbars, chose to negotiate rather than face boarding actions themselves. And throughout the galaxy, species that had spent millennia perfecting sophisticated warfare began to reconsider the value of occasionally hitting problems with hammers until they went away. After all, it had worked for 10,000 years of human history, and as Captain Chen had proven, some things never go out of style,